In the 1830 U.S. Census, 3,776 free blacks owned 12,907 black slaves, predominantly in port cities like Savannah, Georgia, Charleston, South Carolina, and New Orleans. We also know that several free black women owned slaves, and that in 1850 Charleston, at least, women were a majority of black slave owners. In most cases, the persons owned were spouses, children, or siblings the owners were attempting to protect and, if possible, liberate. However, there were many who were slave owners who were also very good at business, such as Marie Thérèse Coincoin, also known as Marie Thérèse Coincoin, and Marie Thérèse Metoyer. Who was Coincoin? What made her unique among black slave owners? What impact did her descendants have in history? Hello, I'm Colin Heaton, a veteran of the United States Army and Marine Corps, former history professor, book author, and welcome to this episode of Forgotten History. Coincoin was a Louisiana Creole born into slavery, August 1742 in Natchitoches Parish. Her owner was the Louisiana French Natchitoches post founder and commandant Chevalier Louis Juchereau Saint-Denis. Her parents were supposedly Francois and Marie Francois. She was the fourth of 11 children. It is believed by some that Coincoin's parents were both African-born and retained much of that culture, and some evidence supports that. However, it is also contrary information that while her mother was an African-born slave, her father was possibly in fact a white French colonist. It is possible that her mother began a relationship with a white colonist at some point after her father died. That would mean all other siblings born after her were probably half white. The latter seems more likely because she was set free from slavery at a young age and went on to receive a sizable plantation from her father, who could have only been white to do that. She ran the plantation with the assistance of other enslaved people who she was given, and they worked for her. Despite her paternity, there is no known African birthplace for her mother, and Coincoin and 4 of her siblings carried African names. One Africanist historian proposed in the 1970s that the African name Coincoin, spelled variously by either French or Spanish scribes, was the name used for second-born daughters among those of the Iwe of coastal Togo who speak the Glidzi dialect, which were regions of West Africa heavily engaged in the European slave trade. Her biological father may have in fact been a slaver, at least he must have been a landowner. Coincoin grew up working in the fields from an early age, and we know that she was kept busy as a nurse, for which she was trained in the Saint-Denis household, while it was gripped by a plague in the 1750s that ran through Louisiana. In fact, as children, Coincoin and her sister, Mary Louise, were trained in pharmacology and nursing, which allowed them to earn a good living after gaining their freedom as adults. Their other 9 siblings would remain enslaved at various colonial posts from Natchitoches to Pensacola, Florida. The plague killed both of her parents and her mistress, so by the time she was 16, Coincoin had entered the household of her godmother, Marie de Soto. Around that time, she also began a relationship with a fellow slave named Chata, believed to be a mulatto with Indian blood as well as black, with whom she would have 5 children, the last being born in 1766 when she was 24. Chata's fate is unknown, but in 1765, her mistress granted Coincoin the right to live with the young French merchant Claude Thomas Pierre Metoyer, who had taken an interest in her during his many visits to the Saint-Denis household. He purchased her freedom in 1778, and over the years they both had 10 children. And being a free woman, she became quite well versed in business. She manufactured various medicines, planted tobacco, and trapped bears and turkeys and other animals for their skins and meat. Yet there was a lot of prejudice regarding interracial relationships, let alone marriages, and the parish priest tried using church law to break up their relationship in 1778. by filing charges that threatened to have her sold away to New Orleans. This is when Metoyer bought and then freed her, making her untouchable. Together they moved away to outlying lands where their liaison continued until 1788. As his mixed-race children matured and married, Metoyer manumitted, meaning he freed, the eldest 5 of the 10 children whom he had held in slavery after he purchased Coincoin and their children. Coincoin continued doing her business. She sold her crops, animal skins, and meat to the local market in New Orleans and was quite successful. As a major landowner, taxpayer, businesswoman, and pious Catholic, she also volunteered her labor for the upkeep of the parish church. Like many other freed slaves in colonial Louisiana, she eventually acquired slaves in order to protect them from others in the parish from purchasing them. She also purchased new slaves, as she was not a believer in brutal ownership and felt that she was a kindred spirit. Most of her slaves were at first related to her, or they were close friends and their children, and she worked the fields alongside them until her own health began to fail, possibly due to recurrent malaria or possibly having contracted scarlet fever. Coincoin lived a very frugal life and worked to help others, investing all of her income into buying freedom for the children from the slave marriage of her youth. By the time of her death, she had freed 3 of those children and 3 grandchildren. Another daughter and many grandchildren remained enslaved as their owners refused to free them or sell them to her. Marie's fortunes grew by virtue of her and her sons receiving land grants and purchasing slaves themselves. They became the leading family of a community called Isle Brevel, populated predominantly by freed slaves who thrived as business people, plantation owners, and surprisingly even slave owners. Various records state that she held one small farmstead of 67 acres, which was probably owned in conjunction with Metoyer, her grant, while other accounts show her later as the owner of a 12,000-acre plantation owning up to 200 slaves. That would make her the largest black landowner in colonial history. The liberal land grant policies of the Spanish Crown, which adjoined the French possessions in Louisiana, allowed for anyone who was free to own land. As this was provided, a stake for her first farmstead on the grand coast of the Red River, now the Cane River, about 10 miles below the town. That 67 acres of bottomland adjacent to Metoyer's plantation was conceded by the local commandant in January 1787 and patented by the Crown in May 1794. It is identified on modern maps as sections 18 and 89 of Township 8 North, Range 6 West. Coincoin soon bought an additional large forested property on Old River to the west of her farm, a tract of land identified today as Section 55, Township 8 North, Range 7 West. This was where she established a cattle farm and hired a Spaniard to operate it for her. In 1807, she bought a third property of developed farmland, which are the northern portion of Sections 34 and 98, T8 North, Range 6 West. This was actually within the French confines of the Louisiana Territory. This third purchase allowed for her younger son to own property, as he had come of age after the Louisiana Purchase, when the United States bought the territory from France. He was too late to benefit from the more liberal land policies of either the Spanish regime or the French government, but he could inherit land from his mother. Coincoin is credited with the founding of the Cane River's fabled Melrose Plantation. However, this land has been documented as a grant to her son, Louis Metoyer, who built most of the surviving plantation buildings prior to his death. Her son, Louis Metoyer, was still technically a slave of his father, Claude Thomas Pierre Metoyer, but Louis was deeded 911 acres of land from his father on which he would eventually build the famous Melrose Plantation. She and her descendants established the historical community of Isle Brevel of Creoles of color along the Cane River, including what is said to be the first church founded by free people of color for their own use, the St. Augustine Parish Church in Natchez, Louisiana. The church is included as a notable site on the Louisiana African American Heritage Trail. As Louisiana moved from being a territory to a state, with slavery becoming even more draconian, Coincoin's descendants maintained their freedom status, land, and still had their own slaves until the end of the Civil War. In fact, the slaves owned by the Matoye clan granted their freedom years before, but they decided to stay on the plantations as sharecroppers working as freed people. As the Civil War loomed, the governor of Louisiana, Thomas Overton Moore, created the 1st Louisiana Native Guard, and it was the first official black regiment in the Confederate Army. The Guard was formed into the state militia as regiments of approximately 1,100 free African-American men who were French-speaking Creoles. When Governor Moore called for troops to defend Louisiana on April 17, 1861, a committee of 10 prominent New Orleans free blacks called a meeting at the city's Catholic Institute on April 22nd to pledge their loyalty to the Confederate cause. About 2,000 people attended the meeting, including 1,500 free blacks who signed a militia muster roll. Many of these were the freed slaves of Coincoin's descendants. 3 white officers were appointed as regimental commanders, but in order to build unity, the company commanders were black Creoles chosen from the ranks of the unit. Among these Creole officers was one Lieutenant Andre Caillou, who was probably a great-grandson of Coincoin, who was already a free black man who changed sides to fight for the freedom of others who were still slaves. Ironically, he would later join the Louisiana Native Guard Union Regiment and die in a heroic charge against Confederate forces at Port Hudson in 1863. Also among the officers was Lieutenant Morris W. Morris, who also served in the 1st Louisiana Native Guard Regiment. Lieutenant Morris had the distinction of being the only black Jewish officer in the Confederate Army and later the only black Jewish officer in the Union Army. The Confederate leadership was somewhat uncomfortable having black soldiers within their ranks. The 1st Louisiana Native Guard was never provided uniforms or weapons, so most of the men used their own resources for both clothing and weapons. Being freed men, most already had long guns. In January 1862, the Louisiana State Legislature passed a law that required militia members to be white. On February 16, 1862, the 1st Louisiana Native Guard was disbanded. 2 months later, on April 26, 1862, the U.S. Army and Navy commanders accepted the surrender of New Orleans. Some of the men of the Guard were approached by Major General Benjamin Franklin Butler to fight against the Confederates. About 10% of them accepted this offer, and in September 1862, they became the nucleus for the 1st Louisiana Native Guard United States Army. Many of these were direct descendants of Coincoin. Therefore, it is easy to see how complex the early relationships were for both black slaves, former slaves, and other ethnic groups working for a common goal, whether in peacetime or during wartime. Thank you for watching Forgotten History. Please click like, subscribe, and share. Send us comments and show ideas, and we will get back to you as soon as possible. Until next time.